was dancing.
Maple syrup. Hey, there we go. Good. Uh, that might have been the cleanest I've played that in a while,
That
Eric. I
was
don't know.
good. I love that you thought it wasn't tuned, and yet that's
Well,
great.
I mean, I haven't had much time to touch it lately, so
I think you're secretly lying, and you
no, I am
just
not
like
secretly lying.
I'm just
Like
joking.
I will bald face lie to your face if I'm gonna lie about something
That's
because
fair. That's not a good
I like
lie.
lying, but only within the framework of a game. Like I will lie all the time within like a secret magic circle of a playing a game, but I don't lie to people. It's just it's not in me. I just can't do it.
That's a good rule.
I feel really like super guilty. I don't know even know why. Like I'm just trying to do some regression analysis of like what happened in my life that makes me so very afraid of lying, and I don't know. I just think it was
Could,
good
could be as
parenting.
simple, or it's as simple as well. You hope other people don't do it to you.
Well, that's
I
probably
usually tend
true.
to live my life by those means. I'm like, I feel
Yeah.
bad because I would feel bad if someone did it to me as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just like, the Eightfold Path, Buddhism,
Let's
all
just
that
call
kind
it
of stuff.
empathy.
Yeah, let's just call it that. Cool. Well, hey everybody, we're here. It's Maple Syrup. It's Wednesday night, and welcome back to Erica, who was, I think, burning the midnight oil last week to
I'm
get a
so
presentation ready for
tired,
this week.
folks, but we're good. It's over.
Yeah. So apparently, when you work for like a large publishing house, game design, publishing,
Just call it what it is.
manufacturer,
It's a
everything, whatever it
toy
is,
company. It's a
you're a
toy
toy company. Spin
company.
Master's a toy company. You actually have to like woo the buyers, and you put on a big old show for them, and that's what Erica has been working on for the last
Yeah.
week, I guess, at least last week.
And our own markets, like our other international markets. It's like, does the Italian market want to pick it up? Does the
Right? Do
German market
you
want to pick
sell
it
to
up?
your
Does
own
the
internals, right?
yeah, it's the whole thing.
Right, because well, I mean, so if you think about it, that's actually really smart in a lot of ways, so that because they know their markets, they know
They
their own
do, and where we
customers.
have to adjust. So this is a whole other
Yeah,
thing that
like
I
there's
keep
different
learning
rules
about.
and regulations, and
Yes.
what can you market and not, and
And things you don't realize about, like, for example, did you choose the wrong animal for
right,
something?
or color
Did
or
you
scent.
no, seriously, like,
No, I'm
there's
serious.
really serious yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
specific things like this.
Don't make things lemon scented and try to sell them in the Philippines. That kind of stuff.
There's interesting like, so you start to think about, like, games start to get broken into, like, how much work is this to get into those like, it's such a consideration up
Yeah.
front, how many languages it's already potentially going to be, and so most of the time, you're just like, "Please, please be English. Please be English."
And so Erica was just telling me before we got on air that there were people in like monkey suits playing the games and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
yeah, no, seriously, there was, like, costumes, there was, like, videos. This thing was 3 hours, just our section, 'cause
wow. And so all
yes.
the buyers and everybody rotate through?
Basically, what it is all the teams are presenting for multiple days, like, they know which sections are
Yeah, yeah,
when.
yeah.
So, like, for example, our day was, because 'cause we're games and puzzles, right?
So
We
Tuesday.
were, like, mostly the morning, and then the afternoon for us was, I think, outdoor and something else, right? And then
Right.
it's like, boys' toys, girls' toys, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Very interesting. It's such a different world. But we're
And
not here to talk about
the
you.
owners are totally wackadoodle, but we'll
They
get back
are.
to that. They're such a funny,
We should
awesome,
actually have a whole show
quirky
just on
thing.
spin because they are
Yes.
a bunch of wackadoodle people.
Oh, it's
But we're here
amazing.
with Sean. Sean, how are
Hi, sorry
you?
about that. This is so fun.
Hey, I'm doing well. How
So
are you?
yeah, that's a really cool filter you got on, buddy.
Apparently, my camera looks like a weird filter or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's a
you look
monochrome
like
brilliantness.
yeah, you look like you're like in some cyberpunk game or something. You're like gonna hack the net.
Okay. Well, I think sometimes like checkered shirts can kind of mess
It picks up the
with the white
colors.
balance or something like
Oh,
that.
that
So
maybe that's true. That
might
would
be
be
doing something
cool if that
funky.
was true. Very neat. So Sean, where should people know you from
Oh,
if they
it
know
still
you at
says
all?
final advice. Let's go
Well,
back to the
let's
beginning
get rid of
before we
that
get
and get
there.
Sean's name up there. Thank
Rewind.
you.
There we
All
go.
right, so welcome,
Hi,
Sean.
Shawn.
That was
Hi,
the
Sean.
fastest show ever. We're already at to final advice. Okay.
I know. Sean, where do people know you from? Or where should people know you from?
So people may know me from. I am 1/3 of the Flatout Games board game design collaborative, and I'm also part of the Flatout Games Collab, which is a publishing company that is sort of I guess, an offshoot of the Flatout Games core team. And so I'm a designer and publisher of board games.
Right.
That's
And I,
2 very large hats.
and there,
Keep
it's
Yeah.
talking.
I think it's so fascinating, um, what your team decided to do. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today. Is like, why'd you do this, and how did you become very successful at it? Because um, for people out there who don't know, there's been a lot of really good product coming out through the collab and through Flat Out Design team all by themselves. So within the last like 2 or 3 years, that little conglomerate of three people plus the people they're associated with have been responsible for some of the best titles over the last 2 to 3 years, and that's saying something.
Yeah, the
And they're
amount of
Canadian,
attention.
haha. I mean, that's also
A little
just
feather in your cap
And
there.
we are all Canadians as
I was
well.
gonna
Canadian,
say,
Yes.
like,
Canadian.
most designers would wish they had the type of attention that your games are getting, and they're getting them for all the reasons they deserve to get them. So we definitely want to hear more about, obviously, the journey to get there.
Yeah.
So how did this kind of start for you? Like, what was the I want to start making board games moment?
Well, he
Well,
got bitten by a radioactive board game, though.
that's right. A radioactive board game in my sleep. Did you know that 7 or 8 radioactive board games will crawl into your mouth during the course of your life while you are asleep?
It's only if you're those lucky few does it change your DNA.
Yes.
Yeah. But for real, so Molly, Rob, and I, who are the core founding members of Flatout Games, we are all from Manitoba, Canada, and about we all kind of met. Well, I've known Rob for a long time. We were sort of like first year of college. We met each other, and we were in residence together at the University of Manitoba, and then we roomed together during
Oh, so
grad
you're a
school.
bison.
Yeah,
My
you
dad's a
bet.
bison.
Oh, nice,
Yeah, yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Uh, but don't you say bison? Isn't that how?
I'm sure that's probably how you should say it. I don't know.
I
I'm
don't
Well,
know,
the
from
too
kid.
much
Ontario.
I was
We
gonna
don't
say
know these things in
also too
Ontario.
much Street Fighter, you're gonna say bison. I'm sorry. I'll just put
Also,
that out
also
there.
true. M
Without
bison
meaning
all the time.
to, whether you want to, no one's
True.
probably not thought about this.
I
Just
don't know
think
if
about it
it's a
for a moment.
Midwest. See, I have this thing where I don't know sometimes if something is like a Canadian way of saying something or a Midwest way of saying something, because
Oh.
sometimes there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah.
So sometimes I meet folks from like Minnesota or North Dakota, and they will say a similar thing to what I would have presumed would be Canadian. And living in the U.S., I definitely still have a bit of an accent, but probably not as much as I did
No,
when
no,
I was
no.
living in
They have
Manitoba.
the accent.
I think
They
so
have the
too.
accent,
I get
Shawn.
called out on mine sometimes, and I'm like, isn't it just that you guys pronounce things wrong?
Yeah,
Like,
isn't that
isn't
just the way
that
it
really
is?
True.
just what's happening?
That's true. So so we all met and we started playing board games probably like about a decade ago. We got in on the like Carcassonne, Catan. We were big fans of like Pandemic and all those sort of like those cornerstone like gateway games were like our jam, and we started really getting into board games and playing a lot of board games together. And then Molly and I moved to Seattle in 2014. Um, and one of the I guess just ways to meet friends around here, we actually moved into a neighborhood that we're like a 5 minute walk away from Blue Highway Games, which is this amazing
Mm.
friendly local game store. It's sort of, I guess it's got its brushes with fame. I know that Rado got his like start in hobby board games by visiting that store before he was going on a cruise, and he bought like Ticket to Ride or something like that, and it like changed his
Changes
world
life.
forever.
Sure.
So it also was massively instrumental in Flat Out Games becoming a thing, because we kind of got into the community there and started just going to all the meetups and playing board games. And Molly and I are incredibly like creative people, and so we always like having like random creative projects and doing like interesting things. And so we were playing a lot of board games, and all of a sudden one day we are just like, we could like try to make a board game, right? Like, why not? And we were like, that would be a fun thing to do with Rob since he's back in Manitoba. It'd be fun to like get him involved. He's really into board games, and at that time, he was back in Manitoba playing tons of games with his friends and everything. And we started working with a friend of ours, Justin, who was a graphic designer who I had gone to school with. And so originally there were four of us, and he was sort of doing graphic design and game design with us. And we just randomly kind of started on over Skype, just like throwing out ideas and trying to like put together board game concepts. And one of the kind of instrumental things that happened is we decided to go to Gen Con in 2017. We were like, oh, we're going to go to Gen Con. We're going to sign up for all of the different talks, and we're just going to like totally immerse ourselves in everything. And at this time, we were getting into some of the board game media that was around at the time, and just like starting to watch videos. And there was local people in Seattle that were doing really interesting things. So we just went to Gen Con, and it like blew our minds that there was all this whole big world of board games out there. And so at that time we had designed I'm trying to think now. I think at that first Gen Con we were going to the first exposure playtest hall with some of our like really rough early designs, which were um, the earliest versions of Dollars to Donuts and Abstract Academy, which were later published by Crafty Games. So those were the first two designs that we ever worked on. And yeah, went to Gen Con. And from there, it sort of, we just started designing more games. And I think the big breakout moment was getting, making the finals of the Cardboard Edison Award for Point Salad, which was almost an afterthought to submit that game. We were submitting Dollars to Donuts, and we had put all this time into a video for it, and we had just been messing around with this idea of like, oh, wouldn't it be funny to make a game like called Point Salad that was a point
Lean in
salad
on.
game?
Right.
Yeah, and I think this had already been done by, there was a series of games. I can't remember if it was maybe Dice Hate Me had been doing a bunch of
Yeah,
like
it was. Deck
deck
builder, the deck
building.
builder game, and
And there
yeah.
and there was a the point salad game. It was obviously different than what we were doing. And so at some point we were just kind of doing it for fun, and within our Seattle game design group had just been playtesting it. But we kind of simplified it down to like the bare bone, very close to what it is today. And we just decided, I was like, I have a kind of a feeling about Point Salad. Like maybe this is the one that could get shortlisted for this award. So we submitted it like last second, threw together this really bad video for it and submitted it. And sure enough, it like made the Cardboard Edison finals. And that was like a huge, like, holy smokes, like maybe this is something that like we could actually do. So
That's
yeah,
really
that's sort of
interesting.
like how it all began.
So contests, right? So what do you
You know
like
what?
about contests,
I was
though?
gonna say contests are a good one. I know a lot of people don't think about it, but there is a bit of a trend if you've watched enough Maple Syrup episodes that there are people that honestly that's where they got noticed for the first time, right? Is because
Mhm.
they got seen in this contest or something like that. You know what I mean? So give it a try, guys. But yeah, let's continue
Yeah.
with your like what kind of contests have you kind of would you recommend maybe even?
Well, Cardboard Edison's really nice because it's pretty open, and I think recently they've also done. I think they've done some different splitting on terms of like different types and different streams that they have for different types of games, which I think is pretty good. I think Cardboard Edison, when it started, was a little tough because you were comparing like apples to oranges in terms of some of the games. Like, how do
Yeah,
you compare this like 3 hour Euro game to like
to a
Point
party game,
Salad or
yeah.
whatever, like or a party game?
Yeah,
So, but I think the thing about contests is that like not only does it sort of like make you have to present your work, like it forces you to like put some sort of an end point into your game. It's kind of like pitching it,
Deadlines
right?
are
Like
important.
yeah,
Yeah.
deadlines are important. So whether it's like a convention that you're going to that you want to pitch the game, or if it's a contest, it gives you parameters for what you need to do to present the work, and then two, you get feedback, which is amazing. Like
mm,
the Cardboard Edison feedback is always super helpful. There's amazing judges for that contest, so a lot of people give their time to playing the games and watching the videos and that sort of thing. So that's a huge part of it too. And it's also just a community thing. Like it's something that's within the community that gets you involved in the community, that makes you meet other people in the
yeah,
community. So I think it's kind of like all of those facets make submitting for a design competition great. And I think sometimes you get like narrow minded, like if you're always just entering, like I think there's a lot of the like 18 card challenges or whatever, and sometimes I
yeah,
feel like if you're only entering those, sometimes you get like you're only like maybe that's not the type of game that you're really like destined to make, or like
Yeah.
sometimes it can be challenging to
yeah,
find the right contest, because I feel like there's a lot of like micro game contests, because micro games are like digestible, they're actually easier to like judge in terms of contests. So that would be like a caution about like contests. Like look for the one that maybe suits the types of games that you're
Hoping to
interested in
submit.
Yeah,
making.
Yeah,
don't
I think
don't try
that's
to
great advice.
pigeonhole yourself because it
Hmm.
has like a constraint that is easier for the judging criteria.
Yeah. Or to be
Right.
honest, you're not going to get the result you want anyway. It was probably wasn't even worth your time if your game doesn't really suit what, is being judged. You're not even get the
Hmm.
right feedback. So, you know, yeah, I think the research is a really important one. Make sure, you're getting the time out of it that you put into it.
And it's really just like it's like soft pitching to a publisher. You need
It
to do
is.
that research for your publishers too when you're going out there pitching. You can't just pitch to everybody
Yeah,
because A,
what
you
kind
don't
of
have that
games
much
do they
time,
make?
and B, they don't want to hear from you. So find the ones that do. The other thing that I really like that you were talking about, and this is something that was very different from, when again, Erica, I think it's so funny that, we're old apparently in the industry. 15 years in the industry, we're ancient. Well, I am. Erica's,
I'm only at like 5, I
yeah,
think.
I know, I
Oh,
know.
maybe 6 now.
Maybe 6. Who knows?
Yeah.
But apparently I'm like a grand old wise man, apparently. I don't know. And when contests used to be run back in the day, I'm going to stroke my beard here. I don't have a beard. I cannot grow one. Therefore, I cannot be old. But we
If
didn't
only that's how it
have.
worked.
We didn't have all those tools like sizzle videos and all these things because not everybody. Like honestly, when I started, I don't think I had a cell phone. I don't know if they existed. I don't know what iteration of iPhone it was at that time. It might have been iPhone like -1 at the
Yeah.
time when I started. So
Well,
anyway, my
I
point
would
being
agree.
that
Yeah.
yeah,
The asks have I would say the asks seem to change dramatically every 2 to 3 years. That would be
yeah,
my say.
but I like it because what it forces you to do is articulate your game. Like talk about your game in a concise format that is literally selling it, right, to the
Hmm.
person.
What makes it
And
good?
I think so many people have a real fear or inability to do that because they've never thought about it. And so when they are like making their first sell sheet, it's just a wall of text because they don't know how to boil it down. But if you've done enough contests, especially modern contests within the last year or two, it's like, look, it has to be a video that's a minute long, or it's got to be a sell sheet that's a 1 page, or it's got to be, your elevator pitch and it can't be more than 50 words or whatever. It's got some
That 30
really
second sizzle.
yeah,
Yeah.
really good constraints to help not only the judges, but it actually helps you as a designer articulate your ideas into a format that is digestible for whatever the audience is in this case. So I think that's wonderful. Okay, so that's you, but and obviously Molly and everybody else. But what about Flatout Games? How did Flatout Games turn from 3 to 4 friends who were designing games that may be published to this whole collab thing? Tell me about the collab. I think that is the most fascinating thing ever.
Yeah. So we were kind of we had starting to find a lot of friends in the industry, especially local here in Seattle. So Playtest Northwest was really instrumental in kind of helping us like find community and playtest our games. And like this is where we're meeting like Joseph Chen, who did Fantastic Factories, Emma Larkins, whom everybody knows, and Randy Flynn, everybody in like our kind of general area here. So we were starting to like build a bit of community around that, having a lot of playtest events and meeting folks that way. And then as well, going to conventions, meeting up with like Tony Miller was one of the first people we kind of connected with, and Carla Kopp at Weird Giraffe Games. And so there was a lot of people that we started kind of engaging with, different publishers, designers, that sort of thing, and just kind of just trying to like build relationships within the industry, those sorts of things, and just like meeting new people and like finding out about all the cool stuff that everyone was doing. And so we always had, so with Point Salad, we signed the game to AEG in, I guess it was back in 2018, and it was sort of like the serendipitous moment because they had like one slot left for their 2019 lineup, and they were looking for like a simple small card game for their big game night. And so it was like kind of a perfect fit for them. And as we were working on that game with their development team and their sort of like art direction team and stuff, we were realizing that we had a lot of opinions on how the product should be and like what kind of style the art should have. And like, so the three of us were, yeah, we were just finding like all the publishing end stuff, we were super interested in it and had like these really strong opinions about it. And so AEG was like an amazing partner because they were like really receptive to our comments and kind of like, agreed with like the different directions that we wanted to go with that product. And so um, that was kind of instrumental in making us like realize that like the publishing end of making board games was really of interest, because there's plenty of designers who are really focused on like themes or stories or mechanics, and they're not necessarily like visual artists or like interested in all, they know that there are other folks that could art direct it better, or that they're like, okay, I've got my game and now I want you to go do your magic. And so I think we always just felt like we had this vision for what our games could look like. And so we always thought, well, maybe there'll be a game that we design that will just self-publish, and we'll like put it on Kickstarter and we'll kind of go that route, which a lot of people end up doing. And we were at a meetup one night in Seattle, and Kevin Russ, who I'd met through Carla Kopp at Weird Giraffe, was in Seattle, and he had this new game that he had just like designed over Christmas. This was sometime in January, and it was this like little pattern matching game with hexes, and it was about quilts. And so he was like, oh, it's kind of like patchwork, I guess, a puzzle game. So he puts it down. It was like basically just shreds of paper. And he's like, I haven't really played it with anyone. I played it with my mom a bunch over Christmas, and we kind of iterated on it. And I took like 2 turns of this game, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like there's something special about the way that like I'm pattern building here. And it was just like so simple. And I was like, what are you gonna do with this game? And he's like, oh, I'll pitch it to publishers, I guess, if it fits. And I was like, are you interested in publishing? Like, is that something? Because Kevin was kind of designing games at that time, but he also like wasn't he's like a full-time like nature photographer and does a bunch of other kind of art related stuff. And I was like, oh, are you interested in board game publishing? And he was like, yeah, like it's of interest to me. And I was like, I wonder if we should just try and like build a team and like publish this game. Like, would you be interested in partnering with us? And like we could do some development on it. We could find an artist and do all this Kickstarter stuff. So it was like this avenue in. And so of course I like tell Molly and Rob about this. I'm like, oh, I played this really cool game. And they're like, okay, I guess like we have plenty of game design ideas. Why would we work on somebody else's design? And then we all played it, and they were like, oh yeah, this is really great. Like this is a really good opportunity to do something. And I guess we realized in that sequence of events that for us, working on other people's games and doing like the development work and actually being able to be, I guess I feel like games get better if they have other people develop it. I feel like if you design and develop your own stuff,
Oh, you'll
sometimes
miss stuff for sure.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
just blind spots. You aren't necessarily seeing it from a bunch of different angles.
Yeah, you're not
And
objective.
Oh no.
so we were like, this is a great opportunity. So we just decided, okay, uh, we had just met Beth Sobel, and we were like, oh, maybe Beth would like to do art for this. It's gonna
Maybe.
have like, who knows what kind of art this will have at the time. And we were like, oh, I don't know about quilts. Like, will people just be like, oh, there's already patchwork, do we need another quilting game? And that's when eventually we were like, oh, there was something with the scoring and we needed to put tokens on the board. So we're like, what would go on a quilt? And we were like, oh, well, cats, maybe cats come and cozy up on the quilt and that sort of thing. So of course that was born, and Calico was born. So we put together the team. We got our friend Dylan Mangini to do graphic design. David Yetzi came on as a developer. Beth Sobel for the artwork. And we just built a little team to kind of get the word out there. And then we went to like every convention, and we had this tiny little cocktail standing table, and we like basically like begged and borrowed and just tried to like squeeze it in anywhere we could. We had an amazing friend, Breeze, who at Aegis
Yeah.
it's their game, and they let us use like a corner of their booth, and like we just had a lot of friends along the way that helped us like promote this thing at all these conventions. So we had this tiny little sign with like the cute cat on it, and so we got all these email signups, and by that October, we launched on Kickstarter, and then the rest is kind of history. Calico did much better than we kind of expected it to
Right.
out of the gate, and then it's sort of like at that before we even launched Calico, Randy had played Calico, and so like the idea of Cascadia kind of came from the influence of like having played Calico, this hex-based puzzle game, and he also was really into tiny towns at the time with the like
Right.
different cards, and so like he had designed an iteration of Cascadia at the time, and so before we even had like launched Calico, we were already like, oh, this could be a really cool follow up to it. So we kind of had like Calico and Cascadia sort of lined up. So we're like, well, if Calico doesn't fail miserably, then like we should totally publish your game. So
Right. And so one of the interesting things that I've noticed about your games is that they always get picked up by, well, not all of them, but I mean like, well, the big ones anyways, the ones that you've done get picked up by like other publishers. But they start off with like you doing all of the development and the graphic design and the illustration and picking all that kind of stuff and making the product. And then you're like basically saying, or people come to you and say, "We'd like to." I'm sure now you're basically asking people, "Would you like to partner with us?" But again, in the beginning, it was like, "We would really like to co-publish that with you, or we'd like to bring that over to France or to China or
mhm.
Japan or whatever." Right? Um, did it start off with like one company and then it just kind of multiplied from that, or was it like all at once a bunch of companies said, "Hey, Calico, let's I want that for our country, our language." How did that work?
That's a good question. So originally, like our when Calico was like relatively successful on Kickstarter, we always had this philosophy right from the start. So like when we started making Calico, we were like Azul was like our high water mark. We were like,
Yeah.
oh, we're seeing this like abstract puzzly family game is really popular. So there's a market for that. And we had this like, on our like whiteboard thing, it was like we want to be on the shelf next to Azul, which was this like ridiculous lofty goal, but at the time we were just like that's what we have to aim for. And so we weren't trying to make like a Kickstarter game for the sake of being a Kickstarter game. We didn't want to bloat it with a bunch of extra stuff. We didn't want to make the Kickstarter exclusive stuff mean that people didn't want to get the game later in retail. And you always like run into those challenges of like, do you want to make something that's going to blow up on Kickstarter, or can you thread the needle and make it work in both? And so we were always like focused on the retail end. And so I think that kind of helped us be able to like make deals to sign it, because it had like the right value proposition. It was like priced in the right range
Yeah.
and those sorts of things. So originally we were sort of like, we knew about like the Foxtrot Renegade relationship, where Foxtrot was this really small studio and they partnered with Renegade to do more of the distribution stuff.
Right.
And so we had some meetings with a few publishers that wanted to kind of like straight up um just like sign Calico. They're like, "Oh, like we could potentially like sign this." Um and we were kind of like saying like, well, we still want to do the publishing end of this. We want this sort of like Foxtrot Renegade type relationship.
Right.
And most of the publishers we talked to were like, well, that's not really our business model. We're
Yeah.
not really
Sure.
interested in that. And also we weren't proven at the time. We
Yeah.
hadn't even launched a Kickstarter, so we didn't have any track record. But we had this relationship with AEG. And so when we sent the game to them, just out of curiosity, we were like, oh, check out this game we're going to publish. Like, let us know if you like, if it's good. We just wanted feedback more or less. And they really, really liked it. And we're like, oh, if you want a publishing partner, like, just let us know. Maybe you can focus on doing kind of the front end stuff of like doing all the development work and the art direction, all that kind of stuff, and then we'll have a partnership where we can help you on the back end of things.
And that was
And
AEG helping on the back end, right?
yeah, so they came on basically with Calico, and it was the same pretty much with Cascadia. We did all of the press file prep, and
Right.
then they helped us with manufacturing. So they had connections with
Yeah.
manufacturing, so they've helped us kind of transition into that realm. And then in addition to that, like you were asking about all the other publishers, like for different languages. So our relationship with AEG, our our contract basically is for um, is like for all regions, and so they're involved in setting up all the partner deals with other languages, so getting it in German and other languages as well.
Right. So they're basically like a really like you're almost like not you're not like a sub studio of AEG, but you're working like that.
Yeah, we're on a game by game basis. So
Yeah.
like we have like basically they we haven't made any deals like early on with them on any games. Like with Verdant, this is I can drop this news because we just announced
Ooh,
it yesterday in our
I saw that. Yeah.
Kickstarter update. But we are partnering with them for Verdant now too. So I think it's like one of those things where if the game like fits and then they have a spot for it in their lineup, then it will go with them. But we're also still, there's
You're chugging
no
along with your
certainty.
things no matter what AEG decides to do about that particular product.
Exactly. And we
Yep.
have relationships with other publishers too that if like AEG decided to not pick up one of our products, it might be that we want to, sign it with somebody else. Also might be that we just have a relationship with distribution and we have the opportunity to get the game into stores in other ways. So I feel like we had done a lot of that legwork on Calico early on because we didn't know
Right.
if we were going to have another publisher, and that's a really tough road. Like
It is. That's
if
the
you're
toughest part.
totally unproven and you go up to like ACD or somebody, they will like kind of barely give you the time of day. They'd be like, well, it'll
Uh,
be a
come
stretch.
come back when you have 3 SKUs. When you have 3
Yeah.
SKUs.
And
But how do you get SKUs?
it was
Yeah.
like with Calico, we were kind of like, oh, like we were like, we really, really, really believe in this product, and like we know it's going to have this retail life. So we actually did make some headway. Like we definitely had some of the distributors be like, yeah, we'll give it a shot. Send
Because
us
they
a
probably
copy, we'll
played the
play
game,
it.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, it's we might be able to do a deal with you. So having signed the deal with AEG meant that we didn't have to necessarily deal with that side of things, which honestly just meant that we could do Cascadia that much faster. And like it's meant that none of us are full time, so we just basically do this in our spare time, and so that allows us to
Yeah,
keep
it's
things
it's
going.
it's it's the it's the I'm gonna reap the benefits and they're gonna take a percentage, and that's the way it works. And I
Hmm.
think for a lot of us who are creatives by night and whatever else by day, that's the way it's gonna go until we decide to like hey, maybe we can make a go of this. For those out there who are listening who are like, how do I get my own like AEG? It's not necessarily
You
always
gotta
possible.
build the relationship.
Yeah,
That's
you
the
gotta yeah.
moral of the story, folks.
And if not, then you can look at consolidation. So we had Hit Point Press come on once, James Takanaka talking about how Hit Point Press consolidates, people, publishing companies that maybe have like 1, 2, 3 SKUs
Mhm.
into a package that a bigger distribution house like ACD would say, oh, I'll take all of that.
It's now worth
Because,
their time,
yeah,
yeah.
basically, it's just time because
Mhm.
time is money, right? It's people wanting to speak to just one point of contact. And
Representing as much as
yeah,
possible.
yeah,
Right.
that's if you're FFG, you have 7 billion SKUs because each of your little card bonus packs is a SKU and your figure is a
Hmm.
SKU. But if you're, Flatout Games collab, you had 1 at the beginning, right? And now you have like 5, and now you have 10, and eventually it's gonna come to the point where it's like, why don't we just go to Flat Out Games collab instead of cutting, doing all these other things to get all 10 products from them? So,
Hmm.
I mean, sometimes it changes because of necessity, right?
Yep.
And the friends you meet along the way, like you said, Eric, I think that's what happens is you make contacts and you have relationships that are beneficial for everybody until you are at that stage where you can do it for yourself. And I think that's all wonderful.
Or help someone
So
else out next.
yeah. And I think the collab kind of does that already, So with the collab, it's not just, the flat out trios games, right? It's like other people's games. How did you decide to do that? Like, was it just because you saw the Calico game and said we could do this, and everybody's like, I guess, like you said in the story,
Yeah.
or is it now more of a like, hey, we're actually open for business. We're actually looking actively at other people's
Like
pitches.
looking for pitching, that kind of thing. Or is it more we stumble on things and we're happy?
Yeah, like right now we're not open for submissions just because we have like a few things in the pipeline, and like I said, like the scheduling it out and our capacity is like a big factor for us. But it's mostly been things that if we see things out in the world, and like we love playing games and just meeting people and checking stuff out, and like if we see something where we're like, oh well, maybe that would be something that like our audience, which now is kind of established in that
Yeah.
like puzzly like family weight
Mhm.
thing, like that's kind of like our
You have a good
area.
niche.
It's your
Yeah.
jam.
Mhm. That's our jam right now. So, we're always sort of like thinking about like, well, what's the next game going to be? But it's also a huge, huge part of it is relationship and like people, and just like getting to work with people that we like and we trust as well. Like we started as like a really small thing with people that we had, known already. And so I think like we are really interested in like expanding beyond the boundaries of that to some extent, and always like trying to find new people and, you know, more, people from different places and different backgrounds and with different ideas to try to work with, whether that's on art or graphics or like game design and development. So I think we in the future want to make sure that we're keeping like casting like a broad net, even if we're not sort of like having like official submissions or anything
Right.
like that, just
Yeah.
keeping an open mind about what projects might like add to like, new and diverse ideas for our group, because our first three games are sort of cut from the same cloth, right? They're almost like a trilogy of games, and they have a lot of similar mechanics and almost like a similar kind of look and feel to them,
Yep.
which obviously there's like a market for that, and people are really excited about that. And we certainly love those three games, and that's why we made them, right? We like don't it's like we always like argue about like our favorite, like, oh, it's like, oh, which part of like, do you like Calico more than Cascadia, or why? Or like within our collab there's always like a lot of like debate about like what are the things that make each of those games like special, and always asking ourselves why. Like, as I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, Flatout Games is putting out like really samey stuff, or are they going to do something different? Like, I don't know, Calico and Cascadia are really similar to one another or whatever.
Or they start
um
thinking you're one type of game.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
like shoe
mhm.
like on one foot. I don't know what the saying is.
Exactly, yeah, or
Like
they're
those
like we
shoes on that one foot.
Yes, like those
yeah.
shoes. I don't know.
So I think it's like, but the thing that's been really exciting about it is that it is really fun to work with our friends, work with different people, and like I said before, we can see other things that the designer might not have seen about their game, and then they can that and by keeping them involved, like all of our designers that we've worked with have been involved in development, and we have like a profit sharing model where like we all record the number of hours that we put in, and then we split the Kickstarter profits like equivalent to how much effort everyone puts in. So we kind of started almost like kind of based on
Oh,
like a
that's where the
worker
collab part's
co-op.
out. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
almost
that's
like set
great.
up like a worker co-op model, even though it's still sort of like independent contract. The
Yeah.
the structure of it isn't like a company because it's a project by project basis, but that's the sort of like economic model that we wanted to go after, to be like, oh, put in the time and you get rewarded.
I was wondering how it actually worked, and I think that's wonderful. And that's like, so this is the type of new business model that I think will sort of shake up this kind of semi weirdly stagnant industry at some point, right? Because it's this thing where games have been made this way because they're just made that way. Why? Well, they just are. Like that's the only answer you'll ever get from a lot of people. Like why are my royalty rates exactly the same for every company, like 6%, 7%? Just because that's the
Mhm.
way it is. That's the way they are. Why do they have to be that way? I don't know. Nobody does, but that's what we accept. It's like, well, why do we accept that? And nobody has an answer for this, by the way, because there is no real good answer except that the margins are the margins, and I get that, but there's ways around all of these things, but we've sort of assumed a lot about who gets paid for what over the course of the last 20, 30 years of modern board gaming. And
I
I think the
think because
collab model is really cool because it breaks that up. It like shakes it up at the foundational core of it all. Sorry,
I
Erica?
I think it helps increase the transparency of things too. Like we always talk about
100%.
one of the biggest problems is like we all need to talk. And when you actually have a collective of designers who are legitimately talking to each other, you're gonna have so much more information going on and
Yeah,
much more
Mhm.
informed decisions. And this is why we all need to share people.
right.
Information is very important.
So, collab, but what about fit to print? What's going on with fit to
Mm.
print?
So yeah, so our next game that will be launching. We'll be launching kind of on schedule with as soon as we can get Verdant delivered, since we're on the, we can't run a concurrent Kickstarter based on Kickstarter's rules, but we're basically trying to get that delivered. And we had a little bit of a delay in China because our factory was closed down. So Fit to Print will be coming to crowdfunding in the fall at some point. But it's our next game, and it is a real-time spatial puzzle game. So there aren't a ton of those out there.
No.
It has a very similar core loop to the sort of first phase of Galaxy Trucker, where you're
Right.
grabbing tiles and building something. So in this game, you are you're doing sort of a reporting phase and a layout phase for a newspaper. So you are all residents of Thistleville, which is a town filled with anthropomorphic animals. And it is a kind of whimsical animal world that we are working with Ian O'Toole to create.
Nice.
So he's doing all of the art, which has been really fun because he's really into. We learned that he was really into like The Wind in the Willows and like a lot of the like classic like.
Yeah, he likes that
Um,
stuff.
yeah,
Winnie the
exactly.
Willows
He
is
he he
awesome.
usually watches the show too, so I don't I can't tell today. The whole the comment system's been broken for a little while. Not broken, but just not working quite right.
It doesn't seem to
So
be
Mm,
maybe clicking in.
I
yeah.
don't know.
So
But Charlotte
so
Kyle says that you are great people.
we just met Charlotte at Origins, which is amazing.
Hey, and
It's really
Andrew
fun
Wolf.
to be able to
Yeah,
meet everyone in person.
Andrew Wolf says asked if the store or you were talking about the Queen Anne area of Seattle. I
Yes.
think yes. Anyway,
Hmm.
that's all we saw. There's probably more people talking. I can't see them. So anyway,
Sorry, folks.
yeah. Sorry, keep going. Fit to print. We're in this
So
whimsical Mr. Toad
yeah.
town.
So in the game, players are going to be laying out newspaper over the course of 3 days, and so it takes place over just 3 3-minute rounds. So it's a really quick game. You can play a game of it in about 15 to 20 minutes. Um, and you're basically going to be grabbing tiles from the center of the board. And there's articles, ads, photos. You're getting all these different types of tiles, and you want to lay out the best newspaper.
Right.
And so once you've done in the reporting phase, you're just grabbing tiles and trying to balance out like different article types. There's mood to all the different articles. So there's like good news and bad news, and you want your newspaper to be like balanced between those. And then you have photographs, which want to be placed next to different articles of similar types. So you're basically having to kind of compute like, oh, how am I going to do all this? I want to get the right balance of news. And then when you are finished collecting, you're stacking up your articles and tiles on a little desk. And then when you decide to go to layout, you just yell layout and you start laying it all out as fast as you can. And if you're the first one done, you kind of take this finishing token, and that gives you some priority for drafting like your special centerpiece tile each round, which changes up your scoring. So it's a really frantic game. It's a lot of fun. It plays really, really quickly, but it has that kind of like core crunchiness of like a lot of the puzzle games that we've made before. And it's designed by Peter McPherson, who did Tiny Towns. So it has that sort of like really, easy, simple rules, but like
Right.
difficult to master kind of aspect to it. And so, yeah, that's sort of like the main piece of it. And the collab has been working on developing it a little bit more, because one of the things that we wanted to be able to provide in a game like that is like a non-real time mode, because we were like, oh, real time is kind of like a nope for a lot of people.
Sure.
So in one regard, I hope that people that have liked our other games would at least try this game, because it has a lot of the similar feel, and it's not so much about like speed and race and like trying to beat people, but it's really just supposed to be get you in that atmosphere of
To
like
get you like that little bit of pressure you need.
that
Yeah.
little bit of pressure that you
Yeah.
need to like that you would feel if you're rushing to a deadline. So I think it's really thematic and fun. But in addition to that, we're developing both like a solo mode, but then also a turn-based mode, which plays quite similar to the rest of our tile laying games, where there's like a simple tile market and you're like getting things one at a time. And so it does offer that an alternative mode for those that want that kind of experience. And so a lot of things had to be sort of like tuned to make sure that that pace of that game was actually like the right amount of time, and like it felt like it didn't feel like just an afterthought to the main like real-time game. You almost had to invent kind of a new way of playing for that. So those are some of the different things we're doing in development. And then finally, because it's such a cool, like you're laying out this newspaper and there's like literally like a million different ways you could lay it out depending on what your tile subset is. We also are developing a puzzle mode, which is going to be a really fun like solo thing to be like,
Neat.
okay, you take these tiles and you have this much space on your board. See if you can maximize points. So like
Mhm.
just sit down with a cup of coffee and just like puzzle it all together, and then we're going to build a bunch of puzzles that will go in the rule book, and then we're hoping to build like a bunch of community around that and have like BGG contests to
Yeah.
see who can
Like
get like
generate
the high
your own.
Yeah.
scores.
Yeah.
Direct people towards a website to submit their puzzles and whatnot. I think that's great. Um, and I like again, I like that the collab is hey, this game is great as is, but what if we did this? What if we could develop it a little bit more? Because I think that's where we end up as um, basically like independent freelance designers losing sight of stuff is in the development process, is where like we're too close to it or we're too far away from it and we're never at the
Hmm.
right distance. But people like the collab can help to do that for a designer who's like, I don't have the bandwidth to do that, I don't even know how to start working on a solo thing, I made this and that's all I know how to make, or whatever, right? There's all sorts of reasons
Hmm.
why somebody might not be able to do what the collab does, or just like there's not enough brain power or people to do this, right? And so I love the idea of having a publishing house that is so cooperative with the designer. And I'm not saying that my publishers aren't. It's just not the same model. And so it doesn't feel like it has
Hmm.
the same weight to it. Like the hours that I'm putting in is just for that 6%,
Yeah.
royalty rate, right? Which is like it's not in the scope. I'm not going to do it, right? Where this is very different. So anyway,
Yeah, and there's a lot of that, that's the thing that we wanted to make sure of, is like if a designer is going to stay on and they're going to do additional work, like we lots of times will like be talking to a designer, and if we're like thinking that we might sign the game, we'll give them some parameters about like this is where we think it needs to be, like for us to sign the contract. And that's like when collab work starts. Like we want you to have like a full set of rules, we want you to have like basically a complete game, and that's how you earn the sort of like the portion of it for like the retail long tail profits, is like it's similar to what a designer would get from any other standard contract. But the collab time is on top of that, like additional paid work to actually like come into the collab and do the work of developing it and trying to make it a hit. Like honestly, we all feel really invested and committed to making the game the best possible version of the game that it can be. And I think when you bring the designer in, you value their time, you value the effort that they bring and the expertise that they bring to the game. I think it goes a long way to like motivating everyone on the team, not just,
yeah.
because it's like we've all been in that situation where it's like the publisher wants you to do a bunch more iteration on a thing, and it's kind of like, well, I already signed this contract, you're not going to be paying me any more money. So it's hard. It's like we were talking before the show on like the things that you prioritize when you get
Yeah.
stressed out or whatever. It's like, is that going to be my priority, or do I want to like keep working on new games where I can sign a new contract? So I think publishers need to be aware that those asks from designers are sometimes really challenging, and it's not, nobody should be working for free, right?
Right. Especially companies that have their own developers. It's like you hired the developer.
Yes.
They should be doing this
Right.
work, not me. Or if you
Hmm.
want me to do this work, maybe you should be paying me what their wages are because I'm doing just as much as they are.
Yeah.
And it's a question of when does the work start and stop based on my contractual obligations. And so I think especially with Kickstarter, and especially when you start as the publisher making promises that you expect me as the designer to fulfill, it's like you made the promise, I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name's on the box, but still, I didn't make that promise. That's not in the scope of this contract. You want me to do it? Let's negotiate. I'm fine doing it, but we need to renegotiate this, right? And
Yeah.
whatever. And I think that the collab is a very fair way to do that upfront, where everybody is kind of very aware that our success is based on everybody putting in the time. And I'm going to get that back out of it, instead of a lot of traditional publishing models where some of them don't even consider like a Kickstarter different than just retail sales, and you're getting the
Right.
same percentage, and it's like that really is slightly different. Especially if
Hmm.
you expect me to write a designer diary and then, have some interviews and do all these other things. And I mean, yes, there is some side benefit to me for that in some ways. But what if there wasn't? What if I was, this is my only game I've ever made. I'm never going to make another game. There's no long tail for me on doing more interviews that I can point people to in the future or whatever. And all that, all that vanity stuff, I guess. I'm not sure what else to call it. Doesn't really put food on the table. So, I mean, and I was telling, Erica was on the ludology with me when we were talking about, like, hats, and I kept saying, "I know I'm the one that's talking like a mercenary here, but, I think at some point in the day, we have to have that
You will get
communication
to
with
the
our
point.
publishers."
Yeah.
Yeah, that
If you keep going for too long, you will start to question it and, eventually realize that maybe you're putting in more than you thought you were going to.
and more than you're
It's
getting out
gonna
for
hit
sure.
okay, it's gonna happen to everybody. Like, you really have to go through it to realize that you're like, there is a limit, but you won't know you're hitting it until you hit it. So,
Yeah. Or when you ask other people, they say, "I would never do that." And you're like, "I did
yeah,
that all day
you don't
long."
real this is why we talk to each other, or need to, but
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
should.
Excellent. Alrighty. So that is what is coming up from Flatout Games, Fit to Print, and other stuff. But what's coming up from us? Let's see. Well, let's take a look. Ooh, it's this stuff. So next week we and probably, Erica, it might have been my favorite game of the gathering.
Nice.
Very well might have been. It's like it was just so simple, easy to play, and calm, and it's exactly what I needed for the time that I was there because I was only there for 3 days. It's like, yeah, I'll play Cascadia game.
Nothing beats a relaxing game.
Yeah, and so it's at 10 p.m. instead of the regular 9 p.m. Why? Because when you're an SDJ nominee, you get to call the shots. I guess I don't know. Don't tell him that'll go to his head. Don't. And then on June 29th, our last show for the season before we take a break for summer is Molly Zeff from Flying Leap Games coming in to talk about party games. And then Erica, Alara, and I will be on summer break for 2 whole months. So you won't see us until September. So that's what's coming up. Hey, let me just hide this and make sure everybody's up. There we go. Shawn, if people want to get in touch with Flatout Games, say they want to talk about the co-op or they want to, I don't know, sub-license one of your games, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, the best way is usually on social media. So we're at Flatout Games. And you can also reach us. We're Flatout Games Mail at gmail.com. You can hit
Okay,
us up
cool.
or just visit our website at flatout.games.
See, there's Ian. I told you he
Oh,
belonged.
Ian's here. Hey, Ian.
Hope
Yeah,
Origins went
so I
well.
have to tell the story about Origins because Ian
100%.
Ian really burned the midnight oil to get us some art assets so that we could have like a working prototype of Fit to Print to play at Origins, which we got to play with Charlotte, which was awesome. So it all worked out well and to the benefit of people in the chat.
There you go.
Nice.
Yeah, the whole chat was involved in that. Awesome. And if you want to reach me, you can find me at Senfog Lim. Erica, where are you?
I met Erica Bouiris.
And you can talk to Alara at TT Void. And if you want to talk to all of us, we're at Maple Syrup. In fact, if you would like to support the show and keep the lights on here, we are at patreon.com/Maple Syrup. Erica and I actually get to see each other in person next month in July for
Mhm.
breakout.com. And we will, when there's a meeting of the minds, because Alara will be there as well, we're going to put our heads together and figure out what are we doing with all this Patreon money that we've collected over the pandemic, where our gracious patrons haven't taken away their patronage. So we need to do something with that is beyond and above what, because it doesn't take all that money just to, run Be Live for a year, which is kind
Well,
of
our
all of
our
the costs that we
intent was
have.
always conventions, and then those disappeared, but guess what's
Yeah,
back again?
right. And so we just don't have time. We never had time to make it for this breakout. So we're going to, at breakout, plan with breakout what we're going to be doing next year. I think that's what the
Mhm.
goal is. So we should have a pretty big like kitty of money to look at. And hey, Shawn, back to you. What is your final advice for all of our listeners out there?
Oh boy, we've come full circle. So I think that if I could leave all the listeners with a piece of advice, I think it's something, that we've learned through doing the collab is just be great to people and be, like have great relationships with people. And if you're doing something that you love, find others to do it with. And it's always like a better journey that way. So I know that's sort of like generic, but at the same time, it's really important to remember that the relationships that you build with people around you, you know, Flat Out Games is not me, and it's not Molly, and it's not Rob, it's not any individual. It's really like the collective of the three of us that came together and put our brains together and our hearts and our minds together and created something that was sort of like more special than any of us could have done on our own. And I think that's really true of like the collab model. So I really encourage people to make teams, do co-designs, find other people that want to make things that you want to make, and just be like, hey, you want to do something together? Like, it's really fun when you get to do something, and it doesn't have to be isolated on your own. You don't have to be a solo game designer. You can branch out and work with larger groups. And it's going to be the publisher's problem to find out how they're going to fit all those names on the box. Like,
Yeah, and get paid individually. There you go.
yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Shawn, for coming on. It's too bad we couldn't have all three of you on. That's never ever happened. We'll have to do that sometime. But we'll see you hopefully. Are you going to be at Shucks this year?
Yeah, we
And
will be at Shucks. I
yeah,
think
so
all three of us will be there.
I'm basically only staying in Canada this year, so I will be at Breakout and Shucks. Those are the only two conventions I believe I will be at, other than the Gathering, which was like it's an hour away. Well, it's not even an hour away from the border. It's like
You're like, you can drive.
I can spit and I can hit, Canada. So yeah, if there's any other cons that are really close to the Canadian border, I would go to those. But just because my dad's real sick, so I need to be able to cross over fast. But cool. Other than that, we will see you all next week when we have Spiel des Jahres nominee Randy Flynn coming in to talk about Cascadia. Again, a game that Shawn is quite familiar with. We know it. We get that. And then the last of the month, next in 2 Wednesdays, will be Molly Zeff coming to talk to us about making party games, Flying Leap games, and all of that. All right, we'll see you all in 7 days. Thanks very much, Shawn. We'll see you all later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.